Before we get started with the application, let me point at that Flutter widget catalog again, for which you can also simply Google to find it in the official docs. There you have basically all the widgets that ship with Flutter, or all the core widgets, nicely grouped into categories. And it's always worth having a look at these categories to find out which widgets are there. Because of course I can't show every single widget in this course, because you don't need every single widget in every app you're building. And even though we're building quite a lot of apps in this course, we still don't need every widget. So this is nice to learn about new widgets, but it's also nice, and that's really something I want to bring into your mind, or which is important to understand. This is also a nice resource to not only learn which widgets exist, but also what they do and how you can configure them. So it's always worth having a look at the documentation of a widget you're using to learn what its intention is, how you may configure it, which related widgets exist, how you can construct it. So, well, that is the how you can configure it part, I guess, which properties it has, and so on. This is really something I would recommend diving into because it's a really amazing complementary resource for learning Flutter and for building the app you want to build. Or, if you don't know in which category a certain widget is what you want to learn about, go to api.flutter.dev, and there you can always search these API docs for a specific widget, like list tile, which we'll, for example, use later down in the course. And then on these pages, you always can learn more about how to use them, configure them, which options you have there, what the idea behind them is, and so on. There are, however, a couple of very important widgets through which I want to walk together with you right now, because these are the widgets we'll see throughout the course, and a lot of them already throughout this module. There are, for example, widgets that help you with general application and page setup. And that would be the Material App widget, which we already saw, which we already used in the previous course app. But it would also be, for example, the Cupertino app widget, which you would use to build an iOS-styled application. And more on that later in this module when I dive into the different styles and how you may adjust your application to look good on iOS. Now, this sets up the overarching application, does a lot of behind-the-scenes wire-up work, which will, for example, also help us later once we add navigation and once we can switch between pages. What you can see on the screen, however, is also heavily influenced and controlled by the scaffold, or for iOS styles, Cupertino Page Scaffold widget. That is the widget that gives you a white background. Of course, you can change the color, but that gives you a background that allows you to add an app bar and so on. So that is the frame for what you see on the page, you could say, and it's a crucial widget for setting up the rest of your page and of your application. Now, once we have the frame set, of course, we want to position our own widgets, and therefore the built-in layouting widgets are also super important. There we, for example, have the container, a nice widget that gives us a lot of different styling and alignment options so that we can, for example, align a child inside of it. But the container is a very versatile widget where we can also give it a background color and so on. You will often use it as a wrapper around other widgets to get a certain styling or a certain alignment. Now, extremely crucial widgets are also the row and the column widget. We already used the column widget in the first course app, and there we used it to have a column of items which we position beneath each other. In this example here, the row widget, of course, is used to position items horizontally instead of vertically. So these are crucial widgets because, unlike the container, they don't just take one child, they take multiple children. So you basically always need a column or a row when you want to have more than one widget sit next to each other or below each other. Now, besides these layout widgets, we also have specific widgets that work together with row and column. Because in there, you can have different child widgets, but when it comes to how much space each widget should consume, there are widgets that can help you there, flexible and expanded. Now, I'll not dive too deep into these widgets right now. We'll see how they work and how you configure them throughout this course. Basically, these are widgets which you would wrap around a child, like a text widget, for example, to configure how much space this child widget should consume in the wrapping row or column. And Don't be confused here, flexible and expanded can both go into columns and rows. So this slide is not meant to show that flexible belongs to row and expanded belongs to a column. Both flexible and expanded can be used in both row and column widgets. Other important widgets we have are, for example, related to holding content. There we have the stack widget. The stack widget is always great if you want to have items, other widgets to be precise, positioned on top of each other. Let's say an image with a text in the foreground. The card widget is also useful. This is basically a pre-styled container widget, you could say. It gives you a nice drop shadow, some background color, a little bit of padding. Remember, padding is that inner spacing inside of a container. So it's basically a container with some default styles. And that card look is a look you actually see a lot in modern apps and also websites where you have that visual container around some content. Besides these content containers, we also have elements or widgets that help us with repeating content. There we have the list view, which is pretty much like a column, but a column that is scrollable, because a default column is not scrollable, as you will also see. Sometimes you also don't just want to have items sit next or beneath each other, but have them ordered in, well, columns as a grid, and for that you have a grid view, which is basically a combination of column and rows, which is also scrollable. So like a list view, but with multiple items sitting next to each other if you want to. And inside of a list view, for example, you could use a list tile widget, another core widget baked into Flutter. This is simply a widget which you could also build entirely on your own. You don't need that. It's just a widget that comes with some default styling and some default positioning or layout setup, to be precise. And we'll also use that throughout the course. We also have widgets that help you with different content types. We already worked with text widgets, but there, for example, also are widgets that help you with presenting images, where you can also control how big it should be, how it should be positioned in a wrapping container, and so on. And you have also a widget that helps you with using icons. And as it turns out, you will also have buttons with icons. There is a specific icon button widget even. Speaking of buttons, we have widgets that help us with user input, like text fields where a user can enter something, or buttons, raised button, flat button. As I just mentioned, there also is an icon button widget, which, well, is a button with an icon on top of it. And you can also build your own custom user input widgets, your own buttons with invisible widgets like gesture detector or partly invisible widgets like Inkwell, which gives you that ripple effect when you tap somewhere, which basically allow you to wrap anything into a widget that can't be seen or can only be seen upon a tap in the case of Inkwell, but that allows you to register a broad variety of event listeners on a tap, on a double tap, on a long tap, and so on. So these are some of the most important widgets, and obviously this was just a quick summary here. We'll see these widgets throughout the course, so there's no need to learn them by heart right now. The core takeaway is that Flutter has a broad variety of built-in widgets and gives you all the tools you need to build your own widgets as well. It takes some experience to find out what you have to build on your own and what's built in. And sometimes it also depends on tiny details. Maybe the thing you want to build is almost built into Flutter, but there's one thing which you can't configure, which you absolutely need. And therefore it's great to have both the built-in widgets, but also the flexibility to create your own widgets. The widget catalog is a great starting point to learn which widgets are built in, but please don't feel overwhelmed by the broad variety of widgets you find in there. You don't need all the widgets in every app you build, and also there are some widgets which do almost the same as other widgets and maybe exist because of historical reasons. They existed first before a better version was released as a separate versions, or they do one tiny thing differently than the other widget does it. So that is how you should think about these widgets. But with that, I'd say we had enough of the theory. Let's actually now dive into our next course application and simply start building it to see how we can use built-in and custom widgets.